far from being ready to be a GM in '74. But he was willing to make the tough decisions. He was willing to do things necessary to change the culture of the organization.
Jim Finks was a great talent evaluator. I think anybody that was ever drafted by Jim Finks kind of a sense of accomplishment just because he was a really solid talent evaluator. And if he picked you, he thought that you were talented enough to play.
Finks is interesting in talking to people who were watching him and covering him and looking back. He had a clear plan. And now we all have plans, but some of them aren't very good and some of them just don't work out for whatever reason. But Finks had a philosophy of getting the quarterback and also getting offensive, particularly tackles, to protect them. And you see some of the patterns that were followed.
This is ironic because his first pick was a running back, but Finks believed that you couldn't have a team until you had an offensive line and a defensive line. So he continually drafted linemen year after year after year until he got that right.
January 28, 1975, the day that Walter Jerry Payton became a Chicago Bear. As a Jackson State Tiger, he earned the nickname Sweetness, rushing for more than 3,500 yards and 66 touchdowns. And with that same degree of power, Payton was the game's superstar for 13 seasons. He launched a new generation of Chicago Bears football. And for almost 20 years, he was the NFL all-time rushing leader with 16,726 yards.
There were a lot of people that knew how good Walter was. They just didn't know whether he could take what he had done in Jackson State and move it into the NFL, because you're looking at bigger guys. And Walter, I think they listed him at 5'11" and probably 170, and he might have been a little more even than 170, because he was as solid a guy as I've ever seen. He didn't even look like he had a waist. He literally looked like he went from his shoulders to about his knees, because he was just solid.
There's so many young running backs. They tell me about Walter Payton. How can I describe Walter Payton? I mean, he was the best. It's as simple as that. He's the best. He's powerful, quick, tough, and just a guy that to go to war with.
The 1AA and the Division II Player of the Year award is also the Walter Payton Award. And I think that if you have to have a role model for young people to aspire to be like as an athlete, you want to use somebody who did it the right way, and had respect for the game. And I can't think of a lot of people that would meet that criteria other than Walter Payton.
Throughout the next decade of the draft, the Bears stockpiled an arsenal of weapons who were new faces into the pro ranks, but performed with a fiery confidence. They were kindred spirits who were setting an unprecedented tone of high football standards.
There was a real challenge there, and it didn't happen immediately, but we always had a great, I would say the defensive side of the football always carried the torch for how you should play when you wear a Chicago Bear uniform in the defense.
Everybody was allowed to be who they were. I mean, you may have a guy coming to practice in a jock strap. You may have in high black boots, guys coming to practice with big glasses with the spinners on them or whatever. And it's just, you just kind of look around and go, wow, is this really happening? But they were football players, and they were men that you wanted to have on your side, and they were special.
We were coming together, with something pretty special with Buddy. And it was just a matter of if we could get healthy enough on offense, especially at that quarterback position, where we could, score enough points where we could win games.
Jim McMahon is sitting there for them with the 5th overall pick in 1982, and the knock on McMahon was his personality. They weren't sure if they could control him or not, but eyesight problems, knee problems, shoulder problems, and when they drafted Jim McMahon, he showed up to Halas Hall famously with the beer in his hand and met with George Halas.
Well, I mean, that's the nature of the position. You got to assume a leadership role, and if they're not going to listen to you, you're not going to be very successful. But I was lucky enough to play with those guys that they listened to me. They figured I knew what I was doing.
It's my personal impression that Jim did not put in a lot of time doing homework, and yet I think when he got up to the line of scrimmage after a certain number of times, his recognition of how the defense was set told him where the soft spots were going to be.
You know, we had so many personalities on that team. Normally, you know, teams have the quarterback's the leader, you know, and he's like the franchise guy. But Walter was a franchise guy. You know, McMahon was a leader. And then on the defensive side, you had so many standouts. You had Singletary, Southern guy. You had Richard, a Southern guy. Hampton, Arkansas, Southern guy. You know, McMichaels, a Texas guy. Me, a New York guy. I mean, we had guys from all over, but everybody gelled together well. I mean, it was a process where we had to understand, you know, how to play with one another.
If there's any NFL draft that would rank the most impactful for the league, most would argue that it happened in the year 1983, a draft class filled with enormous talent that would quickly take the league by storm. It was also a draft that changed the Chicago Bears overnight, with playmakers who became mainstays for a rising franchise.
The Bears that year taking Jim Covert with the first pick, then Willie Gault in the first round, then in the second round, Mike Richardson, Dave Duerson in the third round. And then in the fourth round, they picked Tom Thayer from Notre Dame, not realizing that a few days earlier he'd signed a contract with the USFL, so they didn't have him for 83 and 84.
The 82 draft and the 83 draft, which were Finks's, getting McMahon, getting Covert, Gault, Bortz. We really liked him. We liked his attitude and the way he played. He was actually drafted as a defensive lineman. We had some other pieces already in place with Walter that we were definitely going to be trending up. I could just see it even in 83, which I think we went 8-8. But I knew we were becoming a better team.
And then, Bears scout Bill Tobin spotted an unclaimed treasure, a defensive end from Tennessee State. Richard Dent was the 203rd overall pick of the 1983 draft.
I used to have fun with it because I'm the small guy from a small school, and I'm competing with a guy from Notre Dame. So I'll take the reverse psychology on it. Like, oh, I'm going to get killed. This guy going to kill me. And they're like, oh, you got a post. I said, hey, no, post that guy from Notre Dame. I'm from Tennessee State. I can't compete with that guy. You know, but, you know, that's the way we had fun about it. But they knew my ability, right? So that quote-unquote part went away. Small school because you're kicking everybody's tail.
That was unique. And then having a couple drafts to hit it big, like the draft I came out of when it was Jimbo and Willie and myself and Mark Bortz and Richard Dent and Dave Duerson, the whole crew of guys, Mike Richardson, the whole crew of guys that came out of that draft that really were a core group of starting veterans that had longevity built into them.
He was 228 pounds because he had such dental problems that it was painful for him to eat. He said that, and the Bears said, we'll take him, and then they think, I want to say $4,000 or $5,000 in dental work. Richard eventually began, 6'5", 265-pound Hall of Fame player.
So 83 represents for the Bears a move from a team that was known for its defense, Jimbo Covert. Now we're going to go for offense. So we got a lineman, Willie Gault, a receiver. We've got Jim McMahon coming. We've got all these guys coming in a couple of years that are going to give them a chance to become offensively good enough to now match what's a really, really good defense coming along.
We were at our peak as a team. I, McMichael, Dent, Otis, Wilbur, Singletary, we were at the peak of our powers in 84, 85, 86. The offense, Covert, Bortz, Van Horn, Hilge, peak of their powers. There's a reason to believe that, we had the best record over 5 years in the team history. We had 6 different quarterbacks start for us. You think New England could say that?